I can't remember the words to this song. How does it go?
Welcome back to Kirill Smashes Acting. I'm Kirill, actor, educator, cat enthusiast, and welcome to our second attempt to do a video about memorization. Last week I had a bunch of technical difficulties, so I ended up not uploading this and having to redo it today. So I hope you enjoy. This video was inspired by one of the comments in my previous videos, and I'll put a shout out down below for the inspiration. So I've been asked since pretty much whenever I started acting, how do you memorize everything? Now to me, I never really put much thought into it because that's just what we have to do as actors. It's just part of the job. A doctor writes down their notes at the end of a shift, and us actors have to memorize. Fun fact, my thesis project for graduate school was Valmont from Dangerous Liaisons. And if you've ever seen that show, Valmont talks a lot. So the second I got off stage, I knew every single day I'd have people coming up to me. How did you memorize that? How did you memorize that? Well, today, we're going to teach you how. So we're going to go over a few different things to help you find your way to memorize most efficiently. Now, even though every actor has a slightly different approach, there are a few things I think are not only constant, but really helpful to you no matter what level you're at. So let's get started. So here we go. We have something new to memorize. What do? Here is step 1. Break down the speech. If you're working on a monologue, or if you're working on a scene, you still want to break down the script. For today's purpose, we're going to mostly focus on monologue memorization, but this does apply to scenes as well. So step number 1, break it down. Breaking it down is important because your brain can't handle everything at once. So once you've read the script and you've read the monologue you're about to work with, first put down the 3 things we've talked about since the beginning of this channel: objective, tactics, obstacles. The more you know about what you're trying to memorize, the easier it's going to be to become part of you. The goal whenever we memorize anything is not just to make it so you remember the words, but so that way you can live through those words as if they're your own. So number 1, yes, doggy? So number 1, after you've broken down the obstacles, tactics, and objectives, break it down into units and beats. Now, units change every time the subject of discussion changes. Beats change every time the tactic changes. So you are going to have much larger units than beats. When we get to the example later, we're mostly going to stick to units because not only are they bigger, they're more helpful when you're first starting to memorize something. Beats are really good at helping you color it in, but units are how you get the outline of what you're doing. So great, you've broken down your speech into units and beats. You already know what your objective is, you know what your tactics are going to be, and you know what your obstacles are. Let's move on to the next step. So now that you've broken down the units and beats, here's the next step to think about. In between the units, I want you, in parentheses, to put in what you think your character's transitional thought is. Now, a transitional thought is what makes their brain go from one thought to the next. So if I'm trying to make somebody stay, that's my scene, and I'm saying, stay, 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 and that hasn't worked, and then I say, fine, go. Something in my brain changed my tactics from stay, stay, stay to telling them to go. Same thing with your characters. So you have to put in what you think their transitional thought is. The reason you do that is because it helps your brain connect it the same way their brain works. That way your brain can move out of the way and let the character's thought process live through you instead of it just being rote memorization. So now we have units, beats, and transitional thoughts. Now we can get to work. You want to start by memorizing one unit at a time. Now there's a famous quote by Anton Chekhov. Please don't fact check me on this because I'm positive this is made up. Anton Chekhov once said, "You can't eat a whole chicken at once. You have to cut it up into little pieces and then you can eat it." Same thing goes with a monologue or with anything you're trying to memorize. So we go unit by unit and we use the transitional thought as a way to connect our brain to the words so that they could flow out of our bodies and not just come out. A lot of actors I know, they memorize by writing down everything they need to say. They'll go unit by unit, they'll write it down over and over and over, then they'll write down their transition thought, and then go and start writing down the next unit over and over and over. And by doing this, the words become part of their brains just because they're writing it down. To them, it's almost like a journal entry, and that makes it part of their thought process, not just something on the outside. If you're somebody who is very tactical, or somebody who learns by looking, then this might be the best way for you to try and approach it. Another way, and to be honest, this is my way, is through physically moving through the space while memorizing. So for me, I still break down the units, beats, and put in the transitional thoughts. But then I need to walk around the room to actually memorize it. So I go like this. I find unit number 1, line number 1. I try to memorize it, and then I walk around the room saying it in as many different ways as I can. I scream it, yell it, sing it, whisper it. The goal is not to memorize the way I think it should be performed, but to memorize the words and to memorize the thought process. So once I have line number 1, then I come back and I look at line number 2. I say it a few times, then I walk around the room saying line number 2 in as many ways as I can. And then when I feel I have line number 2, I go around the room saying line number 1 and saying line number 2 until I can get them both. Then I come back for line number 3 and I repeat the process. Now, if my unit is only 3 lines, I then move on to unit number 2 and line number 1, and I repeat it again. I walk around the room saying it over and over. When I feel I have it, I then go back to the final sentence of unit number 1 and try to connect it to the first sentence of unit number 2. So out loud, I'll say the final sentence of unit number 1. Then in my head, I'll say the transitional thought. And out loud, I'll say the first line of unit number 2. And I'll do that over and over until I can go unit 1 right into the first line of unit 2 without it feeling unnatural. I'll finish memorizing unit number 2 the same way I did in unit number 1, meaning walking about the room until I can get the next sentence. And then I'll go unit 1 and 2 back to back. Once I feel I have those, then I move on to unit number 3. And the final thing for this video is the use of electronic apps. Now this could go a few different ways. There are some apps that you can find in the Play Store and in the iTunes Store that will help you memorize. They use different techniques to fill in the blanks for your thought process. Some let you record the other person's lines so that you could say your lines back to something. Others record your lines and help you memorize them through repetition. I'll try to link a few in the description below. I've not really used them because I'm quite comfortable with my method, but I know a few people who have. And if the other 2 methods don't work for you, you should absolutely try giving a few different apps a shot. So now that we've talked about it, let's apply the ideas we've been discussing. In front of me, I have a monologue from the play The Mercy Seat, written by Neil LaBute. It is a beautiful play about 2 people who have to make a choice about where their lives are going in the aftermath of the September 11th attacks. So in this scene, Abby asks Ben what he would want on his gravestone when he dies. And he says he was okay. This leads to the fight and to the discussion we're about to break down. So now if we look at this breakdown, I've already highlighted what is unit number 1. Unit number 1 is him responding to the question and explaining that being okay is not so bad. Unit number 1 ends when Abby responds that his answer wasn't enough, and that triggers him to go into the whole monologue. So we have unit number 1, and then we have the transition thought, which I wrote in. Anything in parentheses, this is what I put in. So I put in, why doesn't she understand me, as a way to express what his frustration is. This is a character that's been frustrated in life throughout the story, but here it boils over in the discussion. So if I were going to memorize it, I would start with unit number 1, the transition thought to help myself. Then I have unit number 2 that I've broken down, and there's a transition thought right here. Unit number 3, transition thought. Unit number 4, transition thought, and unit number 5. So if I were going to start the memorization process, I would read the first line of unit number 1 and walk about the room saying it over and over to myself. Remember, I'm not saying it how I would necessarily perform it. I'm just getting it into my body and into my thought process. Then I would say sentence number 2 of that same unit. I would walk around saying sentence number 2 until I feel comfortable, and then I would walk around saying sentence 1 and 2 back to back. Once I have that, I say the transition thought in my head a few times, and I move on to sentence 1 of unit number 2. I walk around the room saying this sentence a few times, and then I walk around the room saying the last sentence of the previous unit, my transition thought in my head, and into the first sentence of unit number 2. I do that until I feel like those words mean something together and I understand the thought process. Then I'll finish memorizing the entirety of unit number 2 the same way, and I'll walk around the room saying unit number 1 and 2. I would repeat this process for unit number 3, start with the first sentence, then memorize the last sentence of the prior unit into this unit, and the same with unit number 4 and 5 and so on. Now if I were using the written technique, I would first write the first sentence over and over and over and understand what I'm thinking before and after I say that until I can write the first and second sentence and then into the transition thought. Some people like to write down whole units at a time. This is really a personal choice. The important thing is to understand why we break it down, why we go piece by piece, and how we connect the thought process of the character into our memorization. So hopefully that helped you. Let me know if you have any questions about these methods down at the bottom. If you're using an app, I highly recommend still breaking everything down into units so that you can understand the thought process as you memorize. If you enjoyed that video, hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see more, and as always, let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if there's any topic you want me to cover. I'm always happy to take requests. This is one of my personal cats, actually my first cat, Lily Cat, and she is amazing and gives high fives. Say goodbye, Lily. Bye, Lily.